Okay, BookTube, I'm here for a April reading wrap-up. I know this is kind of late, um, but I haven't had time to make videos on the subject, and the first time I had a chance to make a video on the subject, I made a different video instead. So this will be my April wrap-up. It won't be as detailed as I wanted it to be, mostly because of some distance between reading these books. It's been a while. I've finished most of them, or finished most of them a few weeks ago, so my mind won't be as fresh as when I finish reading them. But I'll get into them. I don't want this video to be super long. The first book that I finished in April, I started actually in March, and it's A Day and a Night and a Day by Glenn Duncan. I made a dedicated video on this already, so I've talked extensively about this book. I love this book. It is absolutely mind-blowing. The writing, uh, the entire um, ethos of the book is it's very well done. Um, though it's quite vulgar and quite shocking. It's the premise of a man who's being tortured, um, but he develops a sort of repartee with his torturer, or at least not the person who's really torturing him, but the person who is trying to glean information from him. And he's in his 60s at this point, but we get many different flashbacks. So time to a lot of flashback to when he was in his early 20s as a mixed race man, dating a wealthy white woman, um, and how that relationship basically changed or very much shaped the course of his life, and all the complications with that, and also the um, the time after, uh, the time after, because it's not a spoiler at all that he ends up surviving, because we get flashbacks of him after he's a broken man from the torture, and trying and how he tries to go about life after experiencing um, uh, such brutality at a like almost a metaphysical level of just complete denigration of his being. And the book ends up being very much a commentary on nihilism, on meaninglessness, postmodernism, consumer culture, and the nature of love, which doesn't get a good rap in this book, even though it's incredibly graphic. But it's so well done that I was blown away by this book, and I see myself reading this book again soon. Whether it'll be this year or next year, I don't know, but I this book just has a pull on me, just a magnetic pull on me that I can't seem to shake off. So I think I'll be rereading that book sometime. Then next is another novel. This is Mrs. Dalloway's Virginia by Virginia Woolf, or Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf, not Virginia Woolf by Mrs. Dalloway. This is the Norton Critical Edition I have. This was a reread for me. I read this a few years ago. Um, I remember my first encounter with this book. I read the first 30 pages and was completely out of my depth. I had no idea what was going on or what I was supposed to pay attention to, and I was very frustrated. So I actually put it aside. But my reading ego was triggered because I didn't like the fact that a book had defeated me, especially one that was like 200 pages. So a few months later, I went back into the book and I read the whole thing, and I was blown away by it, but I didn't understand it, and so I thought on a reread it would might become one of my favorite books of all time. Unfortunately, that was not the case this time. I did reread it, and I love the language. I love the way it's written, and that was not a problem at all this time. In fact, I very much was delighting in the way that it was written, but I found the story to be a little bit lacking than from what I remember, and I think that's more to do with my not understanding or or maybe just the story not connecting as much this time, because it's the story of Mrs. Dalloway as a middle-aged woman after the First World War, and she's planning a party, and she's in wealthy upper classes. Her husband is a conservative um, politician in the parliament, or in London, and it's very much a book about London, and a book about memories as we move in and out of her thoughts and the thoughts of people around her, and mostly people that are connected with her, with the exception of Septimus Smith and his wife, um, and their trials, with Septimus being a war veteran who is shell-shocked, who has PTSD, and he can't really can't can't seem to get the war out of his head. He's constantly having these visions and these flashbacks, and he's constantly getting lost in his own thoughts. And it makes his foreign wife, because she is an Italian who married him when he was in Italy, and then moved to England with him, and makes her feel very lonely in this foreign city with no connections. And it's a very good book, but the story to me, just especially with the contrast between Mrs. Dalloway and Septimus Smith, it didn't quite make a whole lot of sense to me. And even though I loved the language, there were parts in here that were still lost on me. Not so much I didn't understand them, but I didn't. It didn't it seemed almost it didn't seem to make sense, and I didn't, and not in the sense of where I didn't make sense in the I don't know how to explain it, but it was like, I don't want to say that this is badly written or whatever. It just seemed like that there were points in this book where it seemed like the book had aged noticeably. Like it was creakiness, not in the sense of ineptly done, but creakiness in the sense that it's very much a book of its time, and since I'm not in that time, I was losing some of the effect of the book, and maybe that's not the case. And maybe on a third reread, or a third read, it'll uh, become more of a favorite. But I did enjoy it, but it wasn't so much a favorite. And the big disappointment for me was, I wanted to read all the critical material in the back here, but I just didn't end up doing that. I read the book, which is about 130 pages in here, and then I put it aside, and then now I haven't gone back to the critical material, which I don't know why. I was hoping to do that and to really dive deep into this book. But that's clear that's not going to happen, and I guess I'm disappointed with that. Next is a book that I had on my list of books about sex I want to read, even though this book doesn't explicitly talk about it. This is Beauty by Roger Scruton, and he has a chapter on here on physical beauty, which is why I kind of loosely intertwined it in my video talking about sex books. This book a book is about a philosopher introducing the concept of beauty, and very much opposed to the postmodern idea of art where anything goes, basically. But I found the book fairly boring. Um, it's very short, so I read the whole thing, and there's pictures in there and whatever. But and it's also the subject matter of art really doesn't interest me as much. I was more interested in the idea of beauty, not the idea of beauty in different kinds of art. But I guess they're very much intertwined, so I should have been expecting that. But it didn't really stick in my mind a whole lot. And it made me clear that I don't want to go on to read any of Roger Scruton in the short term, at least. Um, he has a book on sexual desire that I thought about reading, but that book is longer than this, and if it's going to be written in the same style, I don't know if I want to dive into that right away. Next, we have another book from my list about books on sex. This is The Evolution of Desire by David Buss. If you recall from that video, I had said that his book called The Murderer Next Door, which is about the context of which people normal people think about murdering and the rare occasions of when that actually ends up happening, and how I was blown away by how 80% of that book seemed to be about jealousy and betrayal in the context of relationships. And so I thought, it'd be natural to go back to this author through this book, The Evolution of Desire, with the subtitle The Strategies of Human Mating. And this book was a bit of a disappointment. It did not blow me away at all. It's from the evolutionary psychology realm of things, or he's an evolutionary psychologist, so he comes from that perspective, um, which is an interesting perspective in its own right. He does bring data to the table, his own research and whatnot. But yeah, there's also a lot of speculation in this book too, though not a whole lot of it seems all that contentious or surprising, uh, unless you are radically for in favor of like social explanations, where a lot of the explanations for how humans are and how men and women operate are social constructs. Then a lot of this book will probably irritate you. Um, but he does respond to those irritations because he does, of course, take the evolutionary perspective from this. So um, I thought it was an interesting read. The biggest downside was that his prose was completely flat. It wasn't necessarily boring, though if you're not interested in the subject, he won't do anything to try to make you interested in the subject. There's no flair to the prose at all. There's no personality involved in the prose. It's very much an academic writing, academic trying to write a clear and accessible style, which he does, but it's not invigorating prose at all. So, um, and yeah, it's a fine book. It's a fine book on the subject. If you're interested in the subject, maybe I would suggest the audiobook if you are interested. You might find more entertainment in the audiobook than trying to read his flat prose, but um, overall it was a fine book. Um, I would have, if I had done this wrap up probably a week earlier, I could have gone into more detail into the arguments and whatnot of that book because I find them quite interesting. Um, but at this point, it's a bit too far away, a little bit too foggy for me to confidently give any kind of accurate reiteration of some of the arguments in that book, which is too bad, but uh, it's the way it goes. The next book that I read was actually one of the highlights of the month. Let's see here, it's Unmentionable, with the subtitle The Victorian Lady's Guide to Sex, Marriage, and Manners. And the author is Therese O'Neill. But yeah, this book, it's a very short book, and I was reading this during my lunch breaks, and it's a fantastic book. It's the author um, kind of taking you in the hand, pretending that you are a fairly young, marriage eligible young woman who is been enamored with the 19th century through depictions of it in novels and movies, and she wants to take your hand and bring you back into time and treat you as if you were part of this time, and in that um, and kind of takes you through through a secondhand person perspective through the 18th century, so the Victorian period, and she goes through. Uh, it's very much like a history book, but like through a second person perspective, where it's you wear this and you do this, and this is how you act around men and whatever. And she has all these different uh, short chapters on, and it's a lot of illustrations too in this book. But yeah, she's got chapters on how to dress, um, on how to go to the bathroom, how to bathe, menstruation during this period, um, diet, beauty, courtship, the wedding night, birth control, how to be a good wife, how to run a proper household, public behavior, um, hysteria, which is um, oh, and then the secret vice. So it she kind of descends into more serious topics, but um, it is fairly lighthearted. Like it's okay. It's more than just fairly lighthearted. It's downright funny at times. Um, but she obviously trying to be funny. She's really trying to be funny, and she succeeds quite a bit. There's a lot of images, like I said, in here, and she provides commentary on the images too. But when I say images, not like explicit images, but just it's a funny, thoroughly engaging book on what life was like in the Victorian period. I took a lot away from this, even though I'm not a woman, and this book is taking you through this period as if you were a woman having to live through this period with your 21st century mind. Um, but there was two major takeaways I took from this book. The first one is rather innocuous. It's the uh, the idea of medicine, or when she talks about medicine and sanitation in this book, were very very eye-opening because um, it really made me appreciate the kind of era that I live in now, about uh, the role of medicine and like or appreciating the kind of medicine that we have and appreciating the kind of sanitation that we have now, where you can take a shower every single day if you want. Um, if you get injured, your life will be, or if you have like a serious heart attack or whatever, or if you need surgery, um, you can be very confident that uh, that your life will be saved based on medical proficiency. But in this era, medicine was still very much groping in the dark. And in this era too, we didn't even have things like germ theory. Um, so sanitation was very much a mystery, and um, she recommends that you only stick to drinking alcohol in this period, um, because that's probably the safest thing to drink because the water was full of crap, almost literally and figuratively. Um, so yeah, it's very much an eye-opening experience. The one other point that I want to mention was that even though this book is supposed to be very funny and whatever, like um, the book as the book progressed, and maybe this was just me seeing it more, but the book seemed to get less funny and more um, angry. Like the author was genuinely upset because this is, Victorian era through the eyes of how a woman had to navigate it. And so you have a lot of different treatment or very patriarchal treatment of women, and she hates this and express and gets quite upset, like the chapter on hysteria and whatnot. She gets quite worked up by a lot of this stuff, and at the end of it, I was thinking like she really hates the century. Like she does not, and I think that hatred got in the way of accurate historical portrayal, because I think she lays it on quite thickly. She does quote a lot from uh, books about manners and etiquette from the time, and also books on medical advice towards women and whatever. And a lot of those were written by men, so you can imagine what the kind of stuff that they would have in the book. But I don't think that was an accurate portrayal of how life was really like. And she kind of admits that in the conclusion, where she basically admits that she was laying it on a bit thick, because the portrait that she paints in here about what was expected from a woman was very unfair and very oppressive, and very, very different from what a woman today goes through and is expected from and whatnot. Uh, and so maybe that was her point, but as an accurate historical portrait of how women actually could live and be in the world. I think it was a lot. I think it was a lot. I don't think it was as uh, ridiculous as she makes it seem. Um, but that was the feeling that I was getting through this book. But that's regardless of how this book. I mean, that's not neither here nor there. This book is very entertaining, and it does give you a lot of very good insight into this era of history and what it was like to live practically during this time, and the challenges in that they faced in this period of time that we just take for granted today that are completely almost like we don't think about them anymore. Um, so I do recommend this book a lot. It was very good, very good book on the subject. So that was that book. And then the best book that I read in the month of April, I did finish. This did dip into March a little bit, just a little, um, but it was Cheap Sex by Mark Regnerus, and this is the subtitle here is The Transformation of Men, Marriage, and Monogamy, and it's just a big hardcover put out by Oxford. It's a work of sociology, my second book of sociology for the year. I think it was in March, I read, uh, um, what was it, Chemically Imbalanced? Um, and that was a book on the sociology or the society ideas around uh, the talk of mental illness and what our assumptions are and how we talk about it and why he thought that was unhelpful. Uh, Thinking of um, mental illness as like a physical defect. But anyways, that's not has nothing to do with this book. This book tries to take a sociological approach to the era around sex and very much into the technologies behind that because he is a fairly conservative thinker and so he is sees this as taking and giving a very important diagnosis of what how relationships are today and why sex is cheap. He's making an argument that sex is cheap, and that's through three different points that main points that he has in this book. One that the pill, so the pill which has took away the threat of having a child of reproduction, so it divorced reproduction uh, from the act of sex, and the second one is high quality pornography, which he devotes a whole chapter to, and he thinks that has made sex cheap. And then the third point is online dating, which makes hookups extremely easy and accessible to so many different people, and the kind of comparisons that makes between different people and and whatnot. And this was a fantastic book. It's fairly short-ish, though this book took me quite a long time to get through. Not because it was dense or boring. In fact, it was quite the opposite of that. It was quite the opposite of David Buss's um, approach. Because even though this guy is an academic, he's very much present in his book, and he is very insightful and very thoughtful and kind of thinks quite a bit on the page. I doubt that you will agree with everything in this book, but it's as a diagnosis of why modern relationships seem so disillusioned and why marriage seems to be something that's increasingly rare, or at least or marriage as a common goal seems to be increasingly rarer, and why and what people are looking for in relationships seems to be less and less well defined or less obvious. Um, I think this is a fantastic book, and he brings a lot of stats and studies that he himself has helped conducted on different aspects of relationships. And one of the things that I've seen common among books of sociology, because I'm currently reading one now, which is not a different book of sociology, one that he cites quite a bit in this book, but they seem to, on top of a lot of the data that they give, they also conduct a bunch of interviews with a certain demographic and try to use those interviews, integrate those interviews to kind of put a little bit of a face onto the ideas that they're talking about. So he interviews 100 people in this book uh, about asking in-depth questions about their relationships and how they review relationships and whatnot. And the portrait of a woman that he gives in the very beginning, yeah, Sarah, a 32-year-old who recently moved to Texas from New York, and about her approach to relationships where she kind of would like someone long term, but she's always dabbled with these guys and kind of ends up just giving into sex, even though she doesn't really kind of want to, but kind of just fools around, and it's just kind of aimless, and it just um, hasn't really found anyone that she's been long term with, but uh, uh, she's had some guys that she's had some sort of long term relationships with, but I don't know, it's kind of blurry and weird. Um, and it's all throughout this book about people who are either disillusioned um, with relationships and whatnot, but or men who are actively looking for uh, a lot of cheap sex in the sense of hookups and whatnot. And I want to, well, okay, so I'm going to read to you this summary that I wrote here. I wrote basically his argument there. I'll try to here. I'll write down all his points there because I'm a nerd that way. A book that interests me a lot will really cause me to make a lot of notes and annotations, which I've done all throughout this book, as you see, underlines and whatever notes in the margins. So his entire argument of cheap sex goes like this. So the pill divorced sex from risk, therefore divorcing sex from commitment in a relationship. Sex becomes an object in itself. Pursuit of fun and autonomy uh, separate, um, separate from its productive nature. So autonomy, pursuit of fun, um, sex is divorced from any kind of risk and reproduction. It becomes an object in itself, like an object of pleasure in itself. So then he says the mating market, which becomes divided into those seeking only sex and those seeking marriage, which would be different eras of the spectrum. So marriage would be like the highest form of commitment and of serious relationship, and then you got cheap sex, or you got hookups, um, and seeking only sex as like the cheapest or the lowest form of a relationship. And and then he says most relationships are somewhere in between there. So one of the things he actually does study in this book also is the cohabitation, where you have people who are in a relationship but they're not married, but they're living together. And so you can have like this murky gray area of relationships. Like, where are they? Are they going to get married? Are they likely to get bored with their partner because there's not much commitment there, or as much commitment necessary in uh, coha- uh, cohabiting? But then, um, what are the likelihood of those people end up getting married and having a family? It's it's fascinating how he does this. And then he says, so on that spectrum between marriage and seeking only sex, he says men are heavily on the sex side. So men are usually the ones looking for novelty, usually the ones who are looking for cheap sex. While women are usually on the other side of the spectrum, they're the ones looking for more commitment, for more long-term relationships, and usually are looking more for marriage. And then so he says this creates scarcity of what men or what women want. So women are usually uh, looking for commitment, but men are not. and that means there's a scarcity in the era of men who are also looking for commitment. Um, so then women, they have to give more in order to get in exchange for what they want. And this is the economic exchange idea that he explores very well throughout this book about how relationships, just in general, just a relationship between a man and a woman, or between a man and a man, or a woman and a woman, when it comes to like a romantic relationship, there's always this exchange that's involved between what one person wants and what the other person wants. And he very much, that's one of the central tenets of his book. And he says, so here, with women seeking more commitment usually, and men usually seeking more just sex, uh, women have to give more, meaning what men want, which is usually sexual access, in exchange for less. So traditionally, men had to commit resources and commitment uh, in a relationship in order to get sex. And that, like in, say, the Victorian period would have been you'd have to get married, and um, you'd have to stay committed to raising a family and whatnot. Uh, and So men couldn't just go around and having a whole bunch of sex with a whole bunch of different partners. That was extremely taboo and extremely frowned upon. Uh, this time, now women are, uh, this time men and women are very much entering into sex even before a relationship, and seeing it as almost like a central tenet of a relationship, especially sexual chemistry, and sexual chemistry such uh, as like if there's not, almost as if that is like one of the definers of a relationship. And then he goes on, and this creates dissatisfaction for women because um, women are far more willing nowadays to have sex with multiple men, but they're not getting their relationship, the commitment that they want. And so um, the he says here the incentives men needed to signal commitment have dissolved. Women no longer rely on men's resources. So this has to do with just the general progress of Western society, where women can get jobs and they can um, fend for themselves. They can, uh, pay their own rent, and they can, buy their own things. They no longer need the financial resources of a man, which they used to even say 100, 150 years ago. So advance in that area has led to a diminishing of women relying on men's resources, and yet still that's part of still the exchange, right? Therefore, giving men freedom to pursue sex along with a wider pool to choose from. So, if men don't need to commit a whole lot, then they don't need as much in order to pursue sex, because one, sex no longer has the risk that it once had, and two, they don't need to give up a whole lot in order to achieve in order to get what they want anymore. And so therefore, men usually tend to have control now over over um, the relationship, in the sense that sex is usually something that is fairly easy to obtain if you're willing to jump over the very low hoops in order to obtain it. And Only later in life do men tend to come around seeking commitment instead of purely seeking sex. So that's basically the whole gist of his argument. I don't know if I explained it very well. I certainly don't think I did. But I do want to read a long quote, which will explain a lot of what I was saying here. Um, so here he talks about Nina and Sarah, who are pseudonyms of people that he interviewed, and he has given their response. Uh, okay, I'll read from right as he quotes him here. So he says, both Sarah and Nina waste, quote unquote, or quote, waste is in quotes. Both Sarah and Nina waste sex on men they willingly identify as poor quality. And then he gives here a long block quote from the interview. These days, we give in too easily, and I think that, oh, because he's nice and he's cute and he's sweet, I really want to be with him. We think that sex might kind of lure them into being more attracted, or I don't know, and it just doesn't work out. And then the interviewer says this: "What does it usually take then for a guy to end up getting sex with some girl?" And she says, "I don't know. I think for me it's just different though. Like for me, I'd rather think that sexual chemistry is the most important, and if I really want it, I will." And then this is him continuing on after that quote or from the interview. He says, "With Nina and Sarah and numerous others, or what Nina and Sarah and numerous others do not realize, however, is that even wasted sex is priced cheaply and contributes to the socially discernible cost of sex in the surrounding mating market. It matters." Kristen, a 29-year-old from Austin, portrays a naivete about this when we asked her whether men should work to access sex or not. "Yes, sometimes. Not always, I mean. I don't think it sh- I don't think it should necessarily be given out by women, but I do think that it's okay if a woman does just give it out, just not all the time." And then he continues, Nina justifiably wishes to be treated better, to not be cheated on, to be sacrificed for, to be wooed, but she and so many women are in the unenviable position of simply hoping that some man will someday do these things for them, even while they are unwittingly teaching men in their lives that such things are noble and nice, but just not required in order to be with them. It reminds me of how Carol, he says from chapter 3, struggled to find, quote unquote, to find quality people that you want to be with, end quote, but perceived no connection between this and her habit of having sex promptly with men even if she didn't particularly like them, since, quote unquote, it was just sex. He continues, she wishes to be a free rider, in this case to find a good man, without contributing to the kinds of normative relationship behavior that make men better. It won't work. It can't work. Good husband material doesn't occur naturally, but is instead the product, in part, of socialization, development, and social control. The same is true of the quote-unquote douchebags Deborah keeps meeting. They are made, not born. In the domain of sex and relationship, men will act as nobly as women collectively demand. And then he continues for another paragraph here. This is an aggravating statement for women to read, no doubt. They do not want to be responsible for, quote unquote, raising men. But it is realistic. To be sure, I could put on an altogether alternative set of lenses through which to understand Nina's life and relationship choices. I could truthfully assert that she is exhibiting control over her body, pursuing consensual pleasures when and with whom she pleases. I could also admit that she is old enough to own her own troubles and fashion new ways of dealing with men, so that they would not be able to hurt her. I could counsel her to be patient about marriage, that the right man might be just around the corner, that she doesn't even need marriage to enjoy a successful life. It would be all the truth of a sort. But it would be a short-sighted truth, one that mistakenly equates elective decision-making with sexual and reproductive health, with signals of deep human flourishing. Nina's choices contribute to an obvious share of her suffering. She does not know how to get what she wants. When she looks around her, she knows something is wrong, while perceiving normative but problematic behavior patterns in others and in herself. She is one of the countless victims of cheap sex and the transition towards the peer relationship system, which delivers orgasms with a sigh of loneliness. And that's the quote that I want to share. And I think that quote, or those few paragraphs that I read here, really pull out what I found so fascinating about this book, because um, people want something more in their relationships, and yet it seems so hard these days to get it. And yet, at the same time, uh, people are in an era where it used to be defined where people would wait until marriage and then they would have sex after marriage, and there was always the exchange where um, the man would provide resources and whatnot, and then uh, in order to woo the woman in order to get marriage. And this was like a very traditional idea of marriage, whether it makes you cringe or not to think of that as a real as how things used to be. That's just the way it used to be, and I'm not saying that's necessarily better uh, either. But the way things have changed, with how women no longer need men to rely on men's resources, uh, and now with other areas of cheap sex, such as the pill, and with uh, high quality pornography, um, it takes a lot more for women to try to get what they want. And men seem to be more in control because of the scarcity of men who are actually seeking what women want. And so instead of having to lure men into quote unquote lure men into a relationship through um, wooing and whatnot. Now women have to lure men into trying to get more commitment through giving of sex a lot quicker in the relationship. I think one of the things he studies in here was like um, sex usually occurs within at least the first month of any relationship these days, and how sex is like this central aspect of how relationships are these days, where it never, ever would have been like that in the past. And he thinks that contributes, that the cheapness of sex there is what contributes to a lot of relationship dissatisfaction. So, anyways, that's a long rambly bit about this book. I just found it absolutely fascinating. Um, if I had time after I finished this book, I would have done a video just on this book because it's so good. But uh, I would have to reread this in order to fully inhabit the argument and to give a much clearer picture than I gave now. But that's it for this reading wrap up. I did DNF two books, but I'm not going to really share them here. One of them was How to Learn History when you can find it on your phone or something like that. That was, I only read like the first chapter and a half of that. I DNF'd it because it turned out not to be a book about how to appreciate history in the era of internet search. Um, it was more just a collection of academic articles by this educational theorist. So I found that book fairly uninteresting. But then I also DNF'd the book by David Holbrook called Sex and Dehumanization, which I showed on this channel that in that book on in one of my videos before as a book that I did want to read. But that I finished that book. I DNF'd that book after around 80 pages, and it's only like 220 pages or something. But the book was so archaic, and because it was written in the 70s, it was so archaic, and he's like obsessed with psychoanalysis, and it was very much a book of its time, and his prose was um, just awful. So I could not stand it. I mean, because he was like it's like the hyper intellectual philosophical prose, and I wasn't willing to through all that, fight through all these problems in order to get a little bit of a gist of um, interest and insight into sex and dehumanization. So I DNF'd that book. Um, so that's it for my reading wrap up. This video has gone on quite long enough. Uh, if you want to share what you've been reading in April, feel free to do so. And if any of the books that I mentioned here interest you, or if you have any more questions about them, feel free to let me know. So that's it for now. Thanks, BookTube.